Hello, and welcome to this special episode of Such a Nightmare Conversations About Horror. I'm Katherine Troyer. As you know, for those of you that listen, I have the absolute privilege of getting to interview people who are making and loving horror. And today I'm so excited to be joined by Renee Miller and Steve DeWinter.
Hi.
Hello, hello.
Excellent. So I've told them that there's going to be an awkward moment where I shall read aloud their bios. But before I get there, I just want to tell you why they're joining me today. So Renee and Steve have collaborated on a number of things, including the fascinating and spooky The Babysitter, which is an illustrated interactive audiobook. So if you've ever watched a horror film and yelled at the babysitter for going up the stairs, The Babysitter is your chance to make a different choice, or as I found out, series of choices. I did not make it very far. The first time they were like, I don't think that's the decision you wanted to make. And I was like, no, it wasn't. So we're going to talk about The Babysitter. We're going to talk about interactive horror and sort of what's coming up next. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Renee and a little bit about Steve. So, an optioned screenwriter with a bachelor's degree from Metro State College, Renee Miller has been enthralled by the dark twists and chilling narratives of horror since discovering Dean Koontz in 8th grade. With a penchant for crafting stories that delve into the deepest fears and darkest corners of the human psyche, Renee now brings her expertise to the thrilling world of choose your own adventure audio storytelling. Tune in as she explores the eerie possibilities where each decision can lead to spine-tingling suspense or terrifying consequences. And now, to learn more about Steve. Steve is a #1 best-selling Amazon author of action-adventure sci-fi novels with over 100,000 books sold worldwide. He's topped the Amazon Children's Action and Adventure Sci-Fi bestseller list, the Steampunk bestseller list, and achieved multiple top 20 rankings simultaneously. Notably, he co-authored 2 fantasy novels with the legendary Charles Dickens. Yes, that Charles Dickens. Now Steve is pioneering a new frontier, illustrated interactive audiobooks. These immersive, audio-first experiences combine interactive storytelling with augmented reality or AR technology. You're not just the reader, you're the main character making choices that shape the narrative while exploring real-world locations. If you go into the description for this episode, you can see the links to both Steve's traditional books as well as the link to the illustrated interactive audiobooks. Renee, Steve, thank you so much. I'm so excited about today.
Thanks
Oh,
for
thank you
having
very
us.
much for having us.
Of course. Thank you for reaching out to me. And I had so much fun. So I'm gonna try to like ride that fine line of pumping people up for The Babysitter without giving anything away. You should feel free to give away as much as you want. Certainly when we talk about films on this podcast, we're like, hope you've seen this. And then, we're like, because Susan dies. So you can give away as much as you want, but without giving too much away. I just wanted you to know I had so much fun playing it.
Oh,
And
Oh,
good.
good.
yeah. And I made it through several endings, I think, because I just must have been making right choices along the way, or making all the right choices. But I also just liked when you say 32 endings, you mean it, right? It wasn't just like variations on it where it was like, you're wearing a yellow shirt, the end. You're wearing a red shirt, the end, right? There were just so many great things. So that was really exciting. But first, before we get into horror, I like to ask weird questions. So my first weird question is for you. If you could taste any intangible thing, either because it has no physical form or because it's imaginary, what would you want to taste and why? And I assume you probably don't have the same answers, so you can fight amongst yourselves about who goes first.
Yeah,
Go,
go
Renee,
ahead.
you first.
Okay, that's fine. Well, because I am in the creative field with my writing, I think I would love to taste, what inspiration tastes like. And, in
Ooh.
my mind, I'm imagining that it would be like a burst of citrus. Um, I think being able to taste that would probably help me understand what ignites the spark that is within me and helps me get these, as you mentioned, 32 different endings for The Babysitter. So being able to taste what inspiration tastes like, I think would probably be my #1 pick.
I like that you called it a burst because I was thinking when you said that, it was like, it feels like it would be effervescent, right? So I like that that's so nice. Do you think, would different inspirations taste differently or would it all be like the same?
You know what? I think that they probably would taste differently depending on, what the inspiration is. I would think that like maybe when I have those bursts of, you know, weird horror concepts and ideas, that it would be more of like kind of a cozy, warm, like cinnamon apple cider, taste.
Ooh.
Because, when I'm watching horror, I usually have kind of a blanket over my head and kind of duck down, and horror is usually done for me mostly during October and
Yeah.
the season of the fall. So yeah, I think it would taste different depending on what the inspiration is.
Oh, I like that. Okay, Steve, the bar has been set high. What would you
I know it's
taste?
been said high, and as much as I am this imaginative person and everything, I'm also a very literal person. And
Yeah.
so it's challenging for me. And the only thing that I could really come up with, and thank you very much for sending questions ahead of time so I can think about it, is, what success tastes like. I have no idea. you know, it's so close I can almost taste it, right? But you never know exactly how it tastes. And so I think I would have to say success,
I
what it
love it.
tastes like. And it probably tastes like a milk chocolate bar, Swiss
That's
chocolate,
nice.
creamy, but with a bit of a crunch, so it's not completely melted. It's not too soft. It's not chalky. It's very crisp, but it's smooth at the same time so that after you get that first crispy bite, and then it melts and coats your tongue with the mouth, and it's just something that makes you go, that's it.
I
That's what
like
I was
that.
looking for.
That's nice. Yeah, let me know what that tastes like once you because
Someday,
that's yeah,
someday.
that sounds great. Oh, excellent. Yeah, I always believe in giving questions ahead of time because if you don't, you're just seeing how good people are at improv, right? Not like how thoughtful they are. And I don't want anyone to have to ever improv on my show. So especially if I'm
Thank
going
you.
to ask weird questions, right? That's only
Improv's
fair.
tough.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so now that we know each other and I know what you'd want to taste, I want to talk about interactive horror because, as my question said, dot, dot, dot. Now that's just cool. So, for listeners who haven't had a chance to check out your work yet, can you first sort of explain what folks might expect from a horror text like The Babysitter, which in the email that you sent to me, you said was imagine Pokemon Go meets Choose Your Own Adventure meets horror audio drama. So, how would you describe what people are getting into when they agree to experience The Babysitter?
So
I'll
I'll,
let
I'll
you
start
take
with
this one.
I'll
Yes.
start with this since this is my creation of doing something. Because when I sat down, let me give you some context and history.
Yes.
So when I sat down and I'm looking at these 40 books that I've written and published and made sales on and everything, and said, do I want to write another book, or do I really want to make my mark in this world and do something different and unique? And so I looked around, and not a lot of people. I ran across maybe two or three people out there in the world, somebody in the UK, I think somebody else in the US, doing interactive audio, but they were doing 30-second and 2-minute experiences, almost to the
Mm.
level of just a tech demo kind of level. And I'm like, interactive audio, an interactive audio book. Because growing up, I was a kid of the 80s, and I loved those choose your own adventure books. I mean, those were great. All of a sudden, the story would take different paths. You weren't just observing, you were actually making the decision that went through all the different paths. And so I says, I want to do something like that. And so I sat down to say, so how does that happen? And I looked into and researched all the technologies. I live right here in the heart of Silicon Valley, so I had access to people who work at Apple and who work at Google, and conscripted their help to go and put together the technology for this so that I could make something that was easy to use for the person who's going to experience this, and easy for me to update and change and make new stories for. Because I didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time I wanted to write another story.
Hmm.
So I put that all together and made a Christmas adventure for our local Christmas in the Park and everything, and got it placed in there for that, where everyone can just scan a QR code with their phone. And there was a interactive audio adventure for running around saving Christmas.
Mm.
And then I said, okay, I've got this great thing, but I don't want to be the only one writing stories for it, because not only am I doing everything else for it, I wanted to also say I shouldn't be the only voice that's utilizing this new concept. So that's why I reached out and found Renee and Cassie, two writers that joined me. We're here with you because Renee's our horror writer. Yes. And so, I wanted to get other perspectives from other writers and everything. So The Babysitter, which is what we're talking to you about today, was written by Renee. And so this is a good experience where what can you expect? Oh, yes, the question, I remember it now. So what can people expect? This is truly an audiobook that is a choose your own adventure experience. But I've added on, you don't just sit on the couch and just doom scroll through the story and everything like that. It's GPS enabled so that you go out there and anytime you have to move in the story from one location to another or travel over here to inspect something or look at something else, you physically have to move around in the real world to arrive at the new story world location. And so that it gets you outside and gets people off the couch and outside. And you can simply just walk around the block because I made it rather than a specific location like Pokemon Go, you have to go to a specific location and you always see all the Pokemon Go people gather in this one area. I wanted to make mine accessible no matter where you were, so I made it relative. You have to travel 200 meters to arrive at that new location. So that you travel around, you just grab the phone, pop in your headphones, walk around the block, get some exercise, and have an engaging story that you get to make decisions on and choose as you go along for that. And that was the whole thing was, how do I make it new and unique and different? Not just interactive, but interactive to the point where you actually have to move around in the world to select that interactive aspect as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. So that's the AR side of things, right?
That's the AR tech side of it.
Yes. Renee, talk to me some about the story side of it, because of course, this is the perfect example of how form and content should always be integrated, right? They should never be separate creatures. So talk to me about the content. How is it working with the form and how did it come to you? Whatever it is that you want to share so people can get excited.
When I first started working with Steve, because it was kind of this family friendly idea, I was doing fairy tale retelling. So I've got, a Thumbelina one up there and the big misunderstood wolf, where it's not the wolf's fault that all the pigs' houses went down. And then, he came to me and he's just like, why don't you write something in your specialty? Because that's what, with my screenwriting, that's what I write, our horror scripts. And so I was like, okay, let's try this. And then, he comes to me like at the beginning of September and says, can you have it done in 30 days? And I have to tell you, that's the fastest I have ever written
Oh my gosh.
anything in my entire life, because I was just like, I got to get this down for, Halloween. And it's interesting because it's such a different experience writing a choose your own adventure than it would be a script. Because I've got to keep track of all the different endings that I have and how to bring them back into the main story. And it really kind of is fun because with, books or even, movies, you're kind of limited in what happens. You can't have 32 different things happening in a movie. So, that was really kind of fun because I'm like, any kind of like weird, strange horror thing that popped in my head, I'm like, yes, I can put this in. So I really think that choose your own adventure stories that we're doing really lends itself well to not just the horror genre, but in the entertainment field with anything. Because even with the fairy tale retellings, I can't tell you how many different endings I have at this point, but I think there was a lot of them.
Yeah.
So I really think that, especially with horror, it is just a great format to do.
So I teach a topics in horror class here at my university, and it's a creative expression class. And every so often I'll have a student that wants to do a choose your own adventure. And I'm like, okay, but what do you know about branching logic? And then, and I'm like, and also, you only have a month. But now apparently I can be like, you have a month, that's more than doable. If Renee can do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just going to start changing my expectation. I'm going to be like, I expect a full book. But I can't have a
So
month. I can't believe you did that, Steve.
Katie, you and I must talk. I
Okay.
will show you and give you exactly the easiest way to teach how to write choose your own adventure stuff.
Oh, that would be
And
amazing.
that will help your class out. So
Yeah, because they always want to do that. And I'm always just like, okay, but do you know what you have signed up for? Knowing that I don't entirely.
it's not
but
that hard.
Okay, well then I will. Well, I feel like most of my job is just helping students understand that they have like 6 other classes and 70 other jobs on campus, and that they can't write a novel in the next 3 weeks. But apparently they can write it in a month. I can't believe that. That's amazing to me. Okay, I want to dig deeper into the horror because I think you're right, Renee, that it's a medium that lends itself nicely to a lot of genres. But I think that horror does seem like such a lovely genre for immersive storytelling. So the question is, how do you see the horror of The Babysitter being enhanced or otherwise affected by the interactivity of the audience? Or I guess what I'm kind of trying to ask is, how does playing or immersing yourself in a horror text give you something that you can't just get solely by reading or listening to a book?
Well, I think you kind of nailed it on the head when you said that with the interactive horror, you get to make the decision on if they go to the basement alone or, if they go back into the house. So I think, that's the big part of it is that, you're getting to make those decisions where you're not, sitting back watching somebody else make those poor choices.
You get to make all the poor choices.
That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
And the soundscape that you have built, if you listen to it with your headphones in, right? Like you hearing the sounds all around you. I thought that was a really lovely element that I'm sure, Steve, was something you probably spent a long time working on. But it
Yes.
it meant that I felt, I did feel like there was something behind me, right? Like when the kids kept trying to scare me, I was like, stop it now, because you're to my left and I need you to be in front of me. So Steve, what were your thoughts in terms of building that soundscape so that people would feel like they were immersed in a horror story?
Yeah, I wanted to make it so that it wasn't just, left, right, audio panned, everything. If you want to be immersed in audio, it really needs to be a full immersion where there's something can happen behind you, something can happen in front of you, or above you, or even below you. I have full 360-degree access for the tools that I use to put sounds wherever I want them. And so that was a requirement. That wasn't something that I thought would be nice to have. When I sat down to say I need to do audio immersion, I needed to really make it 360-degree positional audio. But I do the cheat of it. It's called binaural audio, where basically I simulate where things are in 3D space. If you have the $350 pair of Apple iPods with positional audio, I didn't want to do that far. I have the technology to do that, but it means when you turn your head, the sounds stay in position so that you can move around in the sounds. But as the director of an experience that I want you to have, I don't need you turned over here so that the sound that was supposed to come up behind you is now suddenly right here. So I needed to keep with the binaural audio so that when something's coming up behind you, it's behind you no matter where you are and where you're looking for that. So while I have the technology to do full positional audio, I don't want to, because I want the control over getting that jump scare and that experience. And, when, I don't know if you met this ending, when a zombie is crashing through a door,
I didn't.
You hear it and you feel it in the pieces falling around you and everything. And you're just like, back.
Yes. Yeah, I think that horror is, they call it one of the body genres, right? That it's physiological. And I think that it was exciting to get to experience that in a way that even when I play horror video games, which are also obviously immersive, they don't have that, I'm not hearing the sounds behind me because I don't have speakers set up all around my house. So it was nice to hear that. Renee, did it change how you approached the writing experience, that you had to embed yourself so fully in the senses, or is that something that you kind of do anyway in your horror writing?
Yeah, that's really something that I do anyways in my horror writing. But you know, the whole reason I went into writing horror screenplays is because I don't do real well with the inner dialogue and the inner thoughts of the characters. And I'm a very like, you know, audiovisual person. And so that's always something that in my mind as I'm writing, I'm thinking about how is this going to sound for those characters? How is this going to look for those characters? So you know, I would say that it wasn't anything extra that I had to do or think about, which is good because then we wouldn't have had so many fun endings because my brain would have taken up, you know, space in there with thinking about how things are going to sound. So, and I do have to lend a lot of the credit to that with Steve because if I didn't put a lot of sounds in or there were some missing, he has a creative enough mind to be able to add those in and just be like, oh, we really need this sound here. So, yeah.
So, Steve, I know like you timed it so you'd have something released for Halloween. This is an improv question to those of you listening, so apologies, Steve and Renee. Feel free to take a deep pause as you need to. But I know you timed it so it'd release, you know, around Halloween time. But are you also into horror, or was it just like, you know, there's so many people in your world that love
I
horror?
do like horror. I like smart horror. You know, I don't know that I'm into the slasher flicks and everything, but I mean, Bloomhouse is my jam. I mean, anything coming from them, it's like, you know that it's smart and it's engaging and fun. I mean, Happy Death Day.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. You know,
Yeah.
so good. And, you know, I like all the ones that really turn the horror on their head, you know, Death Proof. You know, I like that because I watched all those movies that it was based off of back in the 70s. You know, I was a little kid, you know, because when I was 5, my mom sat me on her lap when we watched the movie The Frogs. And apparently that night in bed, I made her close my window because I didn't want the frogs to get me.
Fair.
I think like 3 years ago, I finally said, this has stuck with me. I've been terrified of this movie, The Frogs, for 40 years. Let me see what the big deal was. What a slow, boring movie that is. And it's no lighting. It's all dark.
That's so
All you
funny.
hear is the frogs going grr, 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 in this darkness. They filmed it outside, cheaply done, no lights, so dark. I'm like, this is what scared me.
Yes.
But I like anything that is not just a slasher flick or anything like that, but that just has that twist on it. You know, the Happy Death Day, the Death Proof, the Final Girls. You know, anything that twists the tropes, I love. But then again, you have to have watched all the tropes for it to really,
You do.
really get you.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it too, with wanting to get it out in October, you know, not necessarily because, you know, Steve likes horror, but I think he knew that it's what I thrive in. And so it was like, hey, let's get a story out. You know, Renee, you know how to do horror. So I think that kind of lent itself as well to the push to get that out for October.
And I
Yeah,
have to
because as
say,
I was sitting down, yeah.
I was just gonna say, and I have to say the endings were also the ones that I got through were also delightfully horrific. So it was really clear that you were like, this is my jam, step
Yeah.
aside. And the one I'll tell you after I finish the recording, my favorite one. But when I heard that one, I was like, oh, okay, so now I know what the story's gonna be. And then I got one that was so wildly different. I was like, no, never mind.
Yeah.
It's all of the horror, which I think is also great because you got in all these different genres. So that's exciting. But Steve, I interrupted you.
Yeah, and the reason for this is we were sitting down going, what are my writers going to write next? You know, what should they do next? You know, because she had written, you know, I had an idea for taking Big Bad Wolf, and then bad was lined out and misunderstood is written above it. You know, he's the big misunderstood wolf. He's not the big bad wolf. And she did such a good job writing out the three pigs and the wolf story, completely changing everything. And for that, and you know, she did really good with the old fairy tales and everything. But I'm like, but she's a horror writer. Her next story should be a horror story. Well, October's coming in a month. So Renee, I think you should write what you're good at and what your wheelhouse is and what you love. But we've only got a month.
Yeah.
My
It was either
gosh.
a month or a year and a month. And we didn't want to wait that long,
No.
right? So that's why the rush was, as we're thinking about it, I'm sure if I had thought about it in April, it would have been better. But I think the sudden rush really gave us lots of good endings as she just went, she's like, okay, let's do it.
I didn't overthink anything. It was just like, this is going in, this is going in, this is going
Yes.
in.
Going in, it's coming out, and it's done.
Yeah.
Which
I
I
don't have
loved.
time
And
to
it was
change.
and it was done great. You know, I mean, I loved almost every ending that was on there.
Yeah.
And I mean, she went in wildly different paths with each one. And when I was sitting down to do the production for it, it was great because I was able to do wildly different things for all these different endings and all the different paths you could take. That
What
was
I
a lot
also
of fun.
liked was that I talked to my students a lot about like, but what is the source of horror, right? So I know where you're scaring me, but what is the thing that you want me to be disturbed by long after I put it down so that I do, close my blinds, or in my case, it's keep my shower curtain just a little bit open, right? Whatever that might be. And I think one of the neat things about all the endings was there were some that the source of horror resonated for me more than others. So it becomes a text that regardless of what's that thing that scares you in the night, at least one of those endings was going to be it for you. So I thought that was also just a really neat element that maybe you would have tucked yourself out of if you'd had more than a month. So that's
Yeah.
exciting too.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
My son always says the thing that gets the most work done is the last minute.
yeah, that feels like
Yeah.
he should join the procrastinators club with the rest of us. Yep. So, Steve, you already talked about a text that at least scared you at the beginning, but maybe not so much now. And you mentioned some amazing films in there. But what are some, it could be a book, it could be a film, it could be a game. I'm open to any horror text varieties that you've read, watched, or played in the last year that has moved you. And again, it doesn't have to be the same answer for both of you. So you can fight for who gets to go first.
I can go
Go,
first.
Renee.
So
Okay.
there
I'm
has
trying to remember what was the horror
there
I
hasn't been a lot of like horror in my house lately, just because I have an 8-year-old. She doesn't always go to bed. I used to put her down and then watch
I've been watching horror
stuff
since I was
later.
5. Come on, Renee. Look, I turned out okay.
See?
So, for me, the movie watching has been a lot of kids' movies lately. But a book that I've read, and it's been a slightly over a year, was Mary by Nate Cassidy. It's about a middle-aged woman who's just kind of trying to blend into the background, and then she hits that time of her life and starts having the hot flashes and the body aches, and then all of a sudden she's got some voices in her head that are telling her to do unspeakable things. And so she heads back to her hometown to try to kind of come to terms with her past. And she starts having these visions of terribly mutilated specters. And she discovers that this town has been worshiping this serial killer and is like trying to
Ooh.
get his spirit into her body. And at first, I'm sitting back, I'm like, this is a crazy story. But then I started thinking about it. I'm like, this was written by a man who is equating menopause with being a serial killer. So, it kind of stuck with me just because of the irony. And I'm like thinking,
Yes.
is that how all men see us when we get to that point? Is that we turn into these raging serial killer characters in their lives? And it just hit me. It just hit me because I am approaching that age in my life, where I'm like, is that how people are going to see me? Let's hope let's hope not.
But then there's also this but also when you hit that stage, do you want to be a serial killer? Right? Maybe that's the more important question.
Exactly.
That's interesting. I'll have to add that to my list. I'm always looking for good horror novels. I think because of the lack of interactivity, sometimes horror novels aren't as scary to me.
Yeah.
Also because often you like the characters more, so you're not as willing to see them have horrible things happen to them.
Yeah.
But that one sounds really interesting. Okay, so Excellent. Steve, what about you? What is something you've read, watched, played this last year that
Trying to remember because I go through so much. I mean, I'm a content grinder. I mean, I grind through so much and everything. But the one thing that really stuck with me, and I don't have much chance to play a lot of stuff for video games, but there's one that is almost a full motion video style game called At Dead of Night.
Hmm.
And in it, your character is you're watching. It's filmed and everything, but as you walk through the house, it's little arrows, almost like a choose your own adventure style, which is what drew me to check it out and everything. And in it, the hotel proprietor, who's got this weird hairstyle, has kidnapped all your friends and is now hunting you down to the hotel. And they have perfected the jump scare
Ooh.
for a video game. And it's incredible. And, and I've watched other people that have also played the video, and, they like to cut through them all screaming, because it gets you, and they know exactly how to do the jump scares and everything.
So
but it takes the visual to do it, because I've tried to do stuff with audio, and we see things much faster than we hear things. And the jump scares really have to be the visual. You can do the music to build up to it, but then you got to hit them with the visual. So it's a tough thing with the audio stuff to do jump scares.
Yes, because sometimes jump scares also rely on you, like, did I see something? Is there something in that corner? Oh, yep, there's definitely something. And it's harder to do that with sound, right? Like, did I hear that in the corner? Is not a question we ask as much.
Right, exactly. Because if I add in a scrabbling sound, you don't know what that is. You can't inspect it further, like a visual element where you can look at something longer. You can't hear something longer because you just heard something. So the challenges that I have with that and everything. But so that video game was good. And I've seen several movies. I can never remember. I always have to tell my wife, if I've seen a movie once, I've not seen it yet. I have to see something more than once for me to remember that I've even seen it. We constantly go through and go, have we seen this? She's all, we've seen it. I'm like, I don't remember any of this. She's all, we saw it.
Yeah, I've had to start using Letterboxd because I watch enough B-level horror movies. And they're, at some point they're all the same. And it's like 75 minutes in and I'm like, oh yeah, I've definitely seen this before. So I've just had to start using something to keep track of it because I don't remember. I've had to do it for books too. Okay, excellent. So we have a game, we have a book. So the next question I have, I asked this question of a lot of folks, and it's one that I definitely feel like people have to have ahead of time. But on this podcast, we talk a lot about affirmative versus disaffirmative horror. And the reason we do is because it was actually like, when I read this theory, it was a game changer for me because it explained to me why, even though I adore Stephen King, I'm not disturbed by his stuff fundamentally in the way that I am by some other people. And I could never figure out what it was for me that like made something be like horror that I couldn't let go of and horror that just had some great jump scares. And so the scholar came up with these terms, affirmative versus disaffirmative. So for those of you listening, as a reminder, whereas affirmative horror portrays the source of horror as threatening our social and cultural value systems, there's a monster, but don't worry, once we defeat it, everything will be okay. Disaffirmative horror is like, oh no, we're the monsters, right? Our value systems, we are the problem. So with the Babysitter, Renee, with the other stuff that you work on and write, where would you place your own horror creations within this framework? So that's the first part. But then there's also the sort of like, what are your thoughts about what horror should do in terms of how it should affect how we see ourselves and how we see what is the monstrous thing in front of us? So I know that's a big question, and we can kind of take it in chunks. And Renee, let's start with you, since I know you have the horror scripts. Where do you see your writing being placed a lot of the time?
In the beginning, when I was first starting to kind of get into writing screenplays, they are more of the affirmative horror. They are creature features, hey, if we just kill this creature, we can go back to our lives and everything's going to be hunky-dory. Lately, with the concepts that I've been coming up with, they are more of the disaffirmative horror. And I think part of that is because, as I've gotten older and I've lived more of a life, I'm paying attention to more about kind of what's going on in the world.
Mhm.
Whereas, like in your 20s, you're like, hey, let's go party. That's like the big thing of which bar you're going to go to. So I think it's, as I'm getting older, I am kind of I still like the affirmative horrors because I do love my creature features.
Mhm.
But they are starting to become more of the disaffirmative where, yeah, I can have a creature feature, but maybe that creature is a result of something stupid that we did.
Mhm.
So yeah, I still may have an affirmative, thrown in there from time to time, but I really do think that I am starting to switch more towards, the disaffirmative horror with my writing.
That makes total sense. Yeah, I like to watch affirmative horror while I work on puzzles, right? Because I'm like, yeah, this is spooky, but I'm not like, oh, humans are really monsters, right? So,
Yeah.
there's definitely a place for it. Steve, as you think about where you want to see maybe other illustrated interactive audiobooks, if there are more that are horror, do you want them to stay in more of an affirmative realm, disaffirmative? Where would you like to see the stuff you're making in terms of horror go?
I don't have a preference of one over the other. They're two entirely different story styles.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another reason why I wanted to bring other authors into doing this, is so that I could get other perspectives, other styles, other stories, other than just what I can write and everything. I do a lot of, I don't do a lot of horror writing myself, but my stories are very affirmative, where there's the bad guy and we got to stop him.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that and I mean, I didn't know about this affirmative, disaffirmative thing or anything, while writing, but in a current story that I just wrote that I'm finishing up, it appears like an affirmative horror, but it turns out it's a disaffirmative reason for it. And, I don't want to give anything away because I want people to
Yeah.
experience this for that. But, it's just this whole thing that comes in out of the blue. It's like, oh, whoa, okay. Where it truly is because of us that the bad stuff is happening. And it's because of the main character directly that
Mhm.
everything that bad that's been happening is happening for that. But it feels like, up until that big reveal, to be an affirmative story
Oh, I like that a
for
lot.
that. And so, trying to layer it in, without even knowing about it,
Mhm.
the rock stars, where they sit there and they play, 6 chords and everything. They don't know. They just jam on the guitar. They didn't have training to know that they were doing
That's
that, but they
right.
just did it.
That's right.
Because it felt right, and it felt like that's the kind of story we should be telling. Not should be, but is entertaining and engaging. It's not this flat cutout single dimensional story. I try to do as much as possible 3-dimensional storytelling for it, so that there's layers under layers, so that when you have a second experience through, you go, oh, that's why that was said there, because it actually feeds in and builds in to it.
And I think
So
it's
as far
interesting you
as,
said that
yeah,
that's something you're doing now, right? And Renee, you were saying that that's like a trend that you've made. I think there is something about being older and just being like, oh, yeah, actually, it's a little bit more complicated than I
we
thought it
get
was.
introspective in our aged
That's right.
years.
Yes.
Excellent. Are you hoping, Steve, is that going to be something that are you working on an edited collection of short stories? Or are you hoping to ship it out? How and when can people find it? I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Are you talking about the one that I was just mentioning now?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that one is a project that I've put together there is I had to coin a term because there wasn't a term that I could find, but I called it an iconic pet brand, is the term that I coined it for. And basically, it's all these Instagram famous dogs and cats and iguanas and axolotls and, all these people, they have these massive amounts of followers for it. I reached out to a whole bunch of people with iconic pets that are on Instagram, and I actually had somebody come back where they have a tabby cat who thinks she's a husky because she was basically from a tiny, tiny kitten raised by a husky. So she acts like a husky. She wears the leash and the vest, and and
Yes.
doesn't run off. Like, usually if you get outside, the cat takes off and goes up a tree. No, she hangs out right with the huskies, and they go out for walks and everything. So I says, well, let's put together a story featuring these pets.
Oh, cool.
And so that's what I did. And then because of who I am, I throw in time travel and alternatives, especially because I'm doing interactive stories. If you have a choice, then that means the universe is splitting, and both of these choices are, the Schrodinger cat in the box. Is the cat alive or dead in the box? Well, in a choose your own adventure type story, it's both until you make a choice. And then it changes. And then this option shrivels up and this option becomes the real one. But if you start at the beginning, you can make other choices and have an entirely different experience. And so I like to throw the concept of time travel into the story, so it's not this meta concept of you're choosing your choices, and do you have a yellow shirt or a blue shirt, and that's a choice. Well, that choice doesn't really matter. I want, I always told Renee, I said, the choices matter. They have to matter. It can't be just, do I have this cereal or that cereal? It has to have a consequence. It can be this cereal or that cereal, but this cereal has a bomb in it. Whoa, I shouldn't have picked that. And now I have to defuse this bomb. The choices have to matter. And so invariably, I like to throw in a little bit of concept of time travel into anything I'm writing because I love that. And so with this story now, you'll be able to find it releasing probably in August. The first episodes will be coming out, and it will be rosiequests.com. Right now, that website doesn't exist. I'm building it now.
Okay.
And everything, but we'll be releasing it, and it will be, you play a character who comes into contact with Rosie and the two huskies, and you become part of the pack and go on amazing adventures.
That's exciting. Yeah,
No
I have to
horror.
say, no horror. I do have to say though, so I've done enough choose your own adventure type things that have been bad, right? That when you first get that option of, do you want to bake cookies or play hide and seek? The cynic in me was like, well, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to end up doing both anyway. But then indeed, right? Like it's so quickly. It was exciting to see how quickly the decisions really made a difference. So you absolutely succeeded on that front. So congratulations. Yeah. Okay, so I think we've kind of talked about, because Steve, I feel like you had your origin story in there about how you got into creating interactive horror and then how, you reached out to Renee. So I think we've answered that question, but I could see people wanting to know, like, but how do I do this, right? Like, I think there are a lot of guides out there about how you write more traditional media, novels, scripts. But if someone were really excited by this, they're listening, they're like, yes, why am I not doing this? This is what I should do. Other than the answer of, well, you should reach out to Steve. What should they do? Like, how do you start thinking maybe from a narrative perspective about choose your own adventure, branching logic, from a digital perspective, all of the tech that's needed? What should people do?
Well,
So
that's
go ahead, Renee, and then I'll hit the big part of it.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that, for me, I kind of fumbled my way through this. Steve gave me the resource of how to do the branching narratives and all that kind of stuff. But, I think that I succeeded because I knew the structure of a story. I knew how to set up the beginning, the middle, the end. I knew how to set up, good turning points. So I think, understanding how to structure a story so that it's successful in what you're trying to do is really the first building block to writing choose your own adventures. And then again, I kind of stumbled my way through it. I know that's not very helpful for anybody. And I also had a great mentor in Steve, because he'd come back and be like, yeah, no, you need to, kind of fix this. We know, you want to try to bring it back into the main storyline. So, unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of advice because, again, this has been a learning curve for me in regards to my writing.
Well, I actually love that though, right? Like I do try to get my students to understand that the way you do it is by failing first, right? And then like
Yeah.
figuring it out. And I like this idea that if they work on their craft, right? If someone just works on the craft of storytelling, that's a good place to begin. So actually that was a perfect answer, Renee. So thank
Okay.
you.
Well,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Oh,
Steve.
well, I'm done.
Yeah.
All right. See ya. All right.
Yeah. Just press off and just go about your day. Yeah. Talk to me about, because I mean, you know, you're the director, right? Both in terms of like the production, but also on a sort of like metaphorical level of that it is your orchestra. So what are the things that people would need to know that might help them figure out if this is for
So
them?
Renee nailed it, and it's probably just because of how I pushed and what I did, but leaning on, because when we teach traditional storytelling, it's a linear process.
Mhm.
You write the story, and there it is. And what people have to realize is the difference between a story and a situation. A story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has purpose. It has depth to it that while it may not be on the page, there's depth to it beyond that leads to the story. Whereas a situation, those old choose your own adventure novels from the 80s were pure situation. There was no
Mhm.
story. And when you have multiple endings, it's a challenge to have those each be an individual story. They end up just being situations where the situation ends up differently than if you made a different choice. Where the choices don't matter, you end up with just situations for that. Because, I'm a published author with over 40 plus books out there, I know story. I mean, I spent 7 years doing nothing but researching and researching and teaching myself how to tell a good story and how, a well-told story told well.
Mm.
And for people who want to write branching narratives, I'll choose your own adventure stuff like your students
Mhm.
and maybe yourself, I don't know. Start with a story. The one thing that I always, that I push everyone on doing is first write the story. Because what you don't recognize, and maybe you do, and I really see it now because doing the branching narrative aspect is every time you have a character do something, there was more than one choice that they made a decision to do. And it comes down to when you're telling people, what does my main character do? Well, they're the main character. They're the protagonist, which means they're doing something.
Mhm.
If you have your protagonist just pulled along and not really making choices, that tends to be a pretty boring story. So having your protagonist presented with choices and making choices, that now means you've got options. Generally, when we read a book, we've read the author's what they considered the best options.
Mm.
And that becomes the main playthrough of an interactive narrative. So what I do is, for example, this story with Rosie and the Huskies, the first thing I did is write a 120-page screenplay,
Mm.
linear. I made my experience and I did my 2-hour movie. And then I took, and it says, okay, I want to release this in episodes. So every 10 minutes, I now put that out. So I now have a 10-minute linear story. I'm now going to add content, add another 15 minutes to a half an hour's worth of content to make this stretch out to be a half hour or 45 minutes of stuff. And every choice that's in here, I can have options. And so then I go and I take my linear story and I start adding branches
Mhm.
for that.
Yeah.
But I know that if they don't end up with a fail ending, because at this point, if you're making decisions, you need to have some failure to have for the choice to matter.
Mhm.
If you don't have any fail endings, your choices didn't matter.
Mm.
But we also have a bigger story to tell. So by taking it into 10-minute chunks, 10-page chunks, I now have an ending that I'm trying to get to. And so
Mhm.
as the branches all go out, some of them will prune off because there are bad endings, and others will fold back in and re-enter the story at another point because I already know where the story is. My branches can actually make sense so that no matter which branch you take, it feels like that was Oh my goodness. Time to play video games. I don't set an alarm. So every day I do 2 hours of VR. I put the
Good for
VR
you.
headset on, and that's my exercise. Video games is my exercise because I'm not sitting down. I'm
That's
down in the living
amazing.
room. Boom, boom, boom. So I have an alarm set for video game playing.
That's amazing.
Um, Otherwise, I'll just sit and work, and it would be bad. So I now have the linear story of what happens as the branches go out. I now know I can re-enter the story at this point, or I can go back to an earlier point in the story. And so that no matter which branch you take, it feels like that was the right choice to have made, especially if it gets us to an ending for the next branch off to the next episode. And so what I say for everyone who wants to write a branching narrative story, start with your linear story.
Hmm.
Yeah.
As long as you've made your protagonist an active participant in the story where they're presented with choices and they make a choice, you now have some natural branching positions that you can then create the branches for, and you won't get hopelessly splintered and lost where you need 1,000 endings. You now already have your story. You can now take these branches and have some of them end poorly, which means you need to go back and make another choice because you had a fail ending, or your other choices lead you to other experiences you might not have had where you build this other story and then it feeds back in. Elf Trouble, that has 6 hours of content.
Wow.
My elf story, but there are 3 huge hour-and-a-half stories in it. Some
Hmm.
of the choices will take you way over, and then there's a whole other experience that you wouldn't even know about if you made a different choice earlier on in the story. They all have to end up to saving Christmas, except for the failure endings. So
Mhm.
they all have to branch in, but writing my linear story first of, if I were just writing an hour-and-a-half Christmas story, here it is. Once I added all the branches content, some branches led to an entirely other story where now I wrote
Mhm.
that story, made the branches for that. I ended up with 6 hours of content for when you play it through, it'd probably take you an hour-and-a-half and go, I ended. Well, what is the other 4.5 hours? And you
Mhm.
have to go look, for that. But that's what I say is that if you want to write choose your own adventures, write your linear story first. And then go in and on every page, look for where a decision has been made and make a different decision. Put in 2 or 3, 1 or 2 additional decisions. If you start doing 5 or 6, it gets unmanageable. Keep it manageable. Another decision of this or that. We're used to this or that. You don't want to have
Mhm.
5 choices because then you have choice paralysis.
Mhm.
There's too many choices. You want to have between 2 and 3, really. No more than 3, no less than 2, otherwise it's not a choice.
Mhm.
And then that way, that's an easy way to write a branching thing, and it can keep going from there. And each branch can lead to its own branches and
Mhm.
whole other experiences. But now you know how the story goes. You can be thinking of that as you write it so that you can try to bring some of at least one of those paths all the way back in and re-enter the story at any point you want.
That's great. I have to also say I really appreciated, because I did get to some failed endings. I appreciated how non-judgmental the narrator was, because I feel like I often don't like to play these types of games because I have to make lots of choices in real life, and I don't want the anxiety and pressure. But he was just like, I'm not sure that you wanted that ending. And I was like, you're so right, sir. And then he was like, you can hit rewind if you want. And of course I'm paraphrasing, but I appreciated that I didn't feel like I had, destroyed everything and I should just give up now,
Yeah.
even though I felt like I'd made a decision. So whoever wrote the gentleness of the narrator, I needed that. So I appreciated that very much
That was the
so.
thing. One of the first things that I had with the Elf Trouble story originally, I had a complaint
Mm.
that came through Christmas in the park, and they complained. Well, one, they complained that it was too bloody and gory, which is fitting for this podcast here.
Yes.
However, unfortunately, the actual text said, because at this point you're being chased by wolves, and you
Sure.
decide not to run across the bridge, but try to fight the wolves off. And the text literally says, I mean, this is word for word. I've memorized this. It says, the last thing you see is the gaping maw of the wolf as it clamps down on you. That's all it says. She
Yeah.
complained. I was playing with my son, and it's too bloody and gory. It wasn't. One, I was very happy because what a great imagination you have.
Yes.
But two, what was the real complaint? And I realized the real complaint was, we've been playing this for 45 minutes. We hit an ending, and now you want me to go all the way back to the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I started saying, okay, endings, failure endings should not be bad for your experience.
Mm-hmm.
So when you hit a failure ending, we now have the nice narrator says,
Mhm.
oh dear, that didn't go as we'd hoped. You know, let's try that again. And then you can go back to right before you made that horrible decision and pick the other choice
Mhm.
and continue your story so that this experience becomes more positive for you rather than, well, that sucks. You know?
Well, you know, and on that note, there was a couple times in the babysitter where both choices ended in failure, and Steve's like, Renee, you can't do that. And I'm like, oh, okay. We'll rework that one.
That's good to know because there were times, I mean, the first time I played through, I had a failed ending really fast. And then I had another failed ending, and then I had like another one. So it's nice to know it really was me, right? Like that I just made poor choices. I thought I was making the best choice, but apparently, well, I mean, if you're going down, there's one moment, right, where you get to choose if you're going downstairs or upstairs, and the answer is neither, right? The answer is you just want to not
You're
do anything.
in
So
a horror story. What do you think is going to happen?
I know there were so many times that I wanted there to be that third choice of just close your eyes and hope it goes away. Because it was like, do you want to go outside or do you want to stay inside? And it was like, no, I don't. I don't want to do either. So it's nice to know that I just made.
End this here.
Yes, yes,
While we're all still alive.
yes. And I liked the fact that after I did finish, right, and got to a conclusion that it said, you know, if you want, you can play this again. I didn't have time to do it, but I liked that possibility because, again, I can't say this enough, but I loved how many different horror narratives you had built in there, right? Of course, we have our traditional babysitter piece, but the various ones I hit, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, took me to some literally and figuratively to some wild places, and I was just really excited to see how many different things. And that was a really nice thing. So I'm hoping that what this next question, the answer will be that I don't know, so we're recording this in June, that in September, Steve's going to come to you, Renee, and be like, hey, we should do another one, but wait until September to make that announcement.
Yes.
But I want to know what's next for the two of you together, separately. And I am hoping one of the answers is that there's going to be another horror illustrated interactive audiobook on the docket. But talk to me about what's next.
Well, I mean,
You just
so,
gave it away.
yeah. In terms of collaboration, I will continue to work with Steve until he decides he's had enough of me. And I am
That will be when I am dead.
Yeah, I'm currently working on a script for Rosie and the Huskies.
Oh, great.
It is a family-friendly horror
Okay.
that involves a haunted house and a ghost child.
Mm.
And I think I have bitten off a little more than I can chew on this one right now. So thank goodness I don't have to have it done in a month. Because I have decided to include riddles and puzzles that need to be solved with different, you know, outcomes if they get it right or if they get it wrong. And I haven't even started writing it. I'm just trying to outline it right now and get the episodes figured out, and it's a lot of work, but
Wow.
you know, I'm excited about this one. I'm hoping that, I think we're working on having this one maybe for next year.
Yes.
Yeah, so hopefully, you know, and then hopefully I can continue to work on horrors, and maybe if, you know, when this takes off, I can do some more adult friendly horrors,
Yeah.
which is in my wheelhouse, to where it's like, okay, they're locked behind a vault and you have to be 17 or older to hear these.
Yes.
So as far as the choose your own adventure, that's kind of where we're going with this. And in terms of my individual projects, you know, I have a horror script, one of my creature features with the producer up in Canada right now. He's
Ooh.
trying to get all of the investments together so we can start filming. You know, and I'm continuing to work on outlining other horror stories. And I am stepping outside of my comfort zone a little bit and working right now on a dark comedy about a serial killer support group.
Yes.
You know, hopefully, you know, you guys will get to see that one on the big screen someday.
I would love
Oh,
to.
I
Do
would
you
love
think
that.
do you think you'll somehow add in this element of the menopause just to like
Maybe, maybe because you know the protagonist is a former serial killer turned therapist who's in her 50s.
excellent.
So that might be a good way to kind of get some of that
Excellent.
kind of irony in there with it. So
Yes, and then we can have a woman's perspective on whether or not that counts. Oh, I
yeah,
love that so much. Oh, excellent.
yes.
Okay, so there's so much to be excited about. Steve, talk to me about what's going on with you. So obviously there's the Rosie Quest
Yeah, so
project.
working heavily on the Rosie Quest, and for the, you know, and I love that Renee's trying to put in puzzles for people to solve. I mean, it's going to make it
Yeah.
even better and better, you know, for the next outing, you know, for the Rosie and the Huskies as they hit this haunted house and have all these things. But as we make other horror stuff, because it fits perfectly with horror, is because I have the GPS enabled thing aspect for it, I can make it so that you're running from the serial killer and or you have to chase something down, you know, because I have this, you have to move. And I can make
Yeah.
it so you have to move quickly. And I can put in that if you don't get far enough in enough time, you hit a fail ending. So then you have to keep trying. And then now you got to run faster, you know, and everything
That's
for that.
cool.
And I'll have to add in probably, you know, for those that cannot run that fast for one reason or another, a little skip feature for them. But I have the opportunity, and one of the stories that I would love to get put together and, you know, get a team for it, everything is Dino Park, where there's a lot of running from dinosaurs and everything. And because I have the 3D sound, as you're running around your neighborhood, you hear the dinosaur getting closer and closer, and you hear those footfalls thudding the ground behind you and the snarling and the breath. And I mean, you're being chased by a dinosaur. As far as your
Yeah.
eyes are concerned, that's happening behind you because you hear it.
That's great.
And I can just imagine your heart racing as you're running, you know, and as you're doing stuff and trying to run from the serial killer or whoever's after you, and you can hear them clanking around and getting closer, and you know you're hiding in something and you hear them try the doorknob, and there's so many things you can do that while not visual, I can still get you with the audio.
Yeah.
Jump
Oh,
scares,
that's great.
not as an easy thing, but I can. But the I blanked on the word, part of my womanopause. That's what men have, I guess. But the suspense of you're hiding and they're searching for you and you hear them moving stuff around and trying things, you know. So I can do the suspense, can't do the jump scares with audio, but
Yeah.
that's, you
Well,
know,
there's
what's next is taking the great stuff and making it interactive and all around you.
yes, and I mean I'm here for any jump scare that's a controversial thing to say. I've learned amongst people who consider themselves horror snobs. I love them, but the thing that's cool is that what's scary is sometimes what you can't see, right? So like that's neat because you have a whole medium that is built on this idea that you won't be able to see it, but you will hear
Right.
it. So I really like that. That's exciting.
Yeah.
I'd be excited to see that in the adult version. I don't know. I really want there to be an adult version because I was like, I want more. I don't want just the maw. I want to see the maw rip my face off before I die.
Good.
Like I want all of it. So I would be really excited to see where you go with that.
I can see the tagline now, R-rated audiobook, now with more nudity.
That's right. Oh, excellent. Oh, I'm so excited. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you both so much for joining me on different time zones. So I know it's later for at least you, Steve, because you said you're in the Silicon Valley. I don't know, Renee, where you are, but it's probably later for you too. Actually, it's earlier for you, Steve.
It's earlier for me.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's still
You're in the future.
never
What's
mind
it like
that.
in the future? What's it like?
It's getting increasingly dark, literally, figuratively, all of the above. But I just thank you so much for joining me, for telling me about this and this letting me experience it. It was so much fun getting to play it. To those of you that are listening, thank you so much for listening to our nightmares. You can check out more information, including the links in the description of this episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katie.
An optioned screenwriter with a bachelor's degree from Metro State College, Renee Miller has been enthralled by the dark twists and chilling narratives of horror since discovering Dean Koontz in 8th grade. With a penchant for crafting stories that delve into the deepest fears and darkest corners of the human psyche, Renee now brings her expertise to the thrilling world of choose-your-own-adventure audio storytelling. Tune in as she explores the eerie possibilities where each decision can lead to spine-tingling suspense or terrifying consequences. Steve DeWinter is a #1 best-selling Amazon author of action-adventure sci-fi novels, with over 100,000 books sold worldwide. He's topped the Amazon Children's Action and Adventure Sci-Fi bestseller list, Steampunk bestseller list, and achieved multiple top 20 rankings simultaneously. Notably, he co-authored 2 fantasy novels with the legendary Charles Dickens. Yes, that Charles Dickens. Now Steve is pioneering a new frontier, illustrated interactive audiobooks. These immersive audio-first experiences combine interactive storytelling with augmented reality, AR technology. You're not just the reader, you're the main character, making choices that shape the narrative while exploring real-world locations. You can follow the links in the description of this episode to explore Steve's traditional books, as well as his illustrated interactive audiobooks.